Okay, Alfonso, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time with us. I know on behalf of the coaches that have signed in, we really appreciate you. Appreciate what you do and the time it takes. So thank you for that. We'll get straight into it. Just to provide a bit of context for people listening, Alfonso and I had a recent conversation about the elite player pathway and found there was a lot of synergy in our thoughts and feelings. And I thought at that point, this should just be a great conversation for coaches to share. So we've got some basic questions. We'll run this as a conversation, and towards the end, we'll open up chat and give people a chance to talk. Alfonso, if you could provide for everybody just a brief potted history from your tracking your trajectory as a coach to your current position with the MLS.
Well, good evening, Tim, and everybody who's online. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody to talk a little bit about soccer. So after a short career playing in Spain and an injury, came to the United States. I started to coach at New York Code of Barbarians Sport Club. From there, we started to have some level of success and moved on to coaching the Eastern New York ODP, regional teams, even the national team pool of youth coaches, coached the Puerto Rican national team, moved on to the Long Island Rough Riders, and then in '96, with the beginning of MLS, helped to select the players for the first pool. And in '98, became coach of the Metro Stars at the time. Did that for a season, then coached Project 40, so the young up-and-coming players in the United States for a couple of years. Continued on to coach in Tampa Bay Mutiny in MLS, and worked also with the full national team. And Bruce Arena was the assistant coach during the Confederations Cup. And for the last 17 years, I've been working in MLS as the technical director, wearing different hats, doing some player development stuff. But in the last few years, I've been working more in competition for the first division, and anything has to do with the game from Major League Soccer and the First League.
Thanks so much. It's obviously rich in experience. I'm sure you've got some great stories. Perhaps we should do a series of webinars. Fascinating. So in our recent conversation, we talked a little bit about soccer being the world's game and the elite pathway just being a small percentage. If you can just expand on that thought for me, for the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think different from the other American sports that are mostly American-based or don't have a big international participation, soccer is truly a sport that it's played around the world. I think there are right now more countries in FIFA than there are in the United Nations. So that tells you about the popularity and the growth of the sport. The sport is played professionally in most of these countries to one level or another. And therefore, our American players are not only competing with those in this country, but they're competing also with players from every country in the world who want to come in and play in MLS. MLS has grown exponentially over the last 25 years, and in only 25 years has become a true world. It's had a place in the world game. We have now more, I think with the exception of the EPL probably and La Liga, MLS games are seen in more countries around the world. Last count, I think our games were being televised in 180 countries around the world. So there's a level of exposure for the American players and for those that are coming to play in MLS. So I think that now the time has come for those players in the United States who are truly looking for a pathway to the professional game to have a vehicle that can help them to accomplish that.
Thanks very much. Talk a little bit about, I know we talked about the grassroots players in America and how we think they've been serviced and how different branches of youth players have been serviced, and perhaps which one you think is most in need.
Well, as you know, the game at the youth level in the States began really growing in the late 70s, early 80s after the demise of the first North American Soccer League. And that really gave way to the academies to grow in the United States. So they started popping up everywhere. But the goal has always been of these academies was to develop players with the college game in mind. So I think that what convinced parents who perhaps were not very knowledgeable of the sport is that the fact that the children would have an opportunity to obtain a college education or to partially obtain a college education. And this is where the focus of soccer continued to grow for both boys and girls. Those clubs began to figure out a way that they can expose these athletes or these players to the college game. So a number of tournaments began to pop up everywhere. The game began to become a real money-making industry. And as we know, right now, youth soccer in the United States is, I think it's almost close to 20 billion a year that is producing from youth soccer. So it's become an industry, but I think that the one thing that has perhaps been left a little bit on the side has been the development of the elite player. Due to the fact that when clubs have a couple of really good players, they build their programs around them. This is what helps to attract other players to the program. And those players are not put in an environment where they're being challenged on a daily basis. So while I think that the game has continued to grow and is grown massively, perhaps those elite players have been a little bit overlooked by not being placed in environments that challenge them daily and forces them to be as good as they could be.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think I agree. We've done a good job in this country with our grassroots players to a degree and all the players, but our elite players have been a little bit left aside. Historically, like me, you remember the old Region 1 where all the kids were on one pathway. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about issues that you think have haunted the elite player pathway, and then we'll move on and discuss possible solutions, if that's okay.
Well, I think that over the years, there has been an unbalance between the training and the development of the player and the competition. So we did a study a few years back, and we found that U14 and U15 players were playing over 100 matches, competitive matches a year. I think it was somewhere between 110, 115 matches a year. So when you play that number of competitive matches, there is not the balanced amount of training that goes with it. So it's going to tournaments, it's competition, but these players are not really honing the skills. So when they come to the regional pool, when they come into a national team, there are severe deficiencies in the understanding of the game. So I don't think that what probably the greatest deficiency with the youngest players here is to really develop a soccer brain, to have a real in-depth understanding at a young age of what the demands of the game are. So the challenge of the ball, the challenge of time, space, opponents, and teammates. Because of the fact that they're being bred up in such a competitive environment, a lot of teams have been able to succeed by having a couple of fast kids in the front, a couple of fast kids in the back, play some direct ball, and able to succeed at a young age. But when they get to that 15, 16-year-old level, the technical and tactical abilities of the game are missing. And when they're facing players that have those abilities, the deficiencies really come up. So I think that this is one of the main issues that we have had here, and that we've figured on once we started with MLS with the academies, how could we tackle that? So the programs that have been set up through the MLS academies, and it came almost in conjunction with the development of the DA Academy, it went hand in hand. These academies began to train the players on 5 days a week to one day of matches. The ratio began to become more with focusing on developing the individual skills of the players to develop them for the professional game. I mean, the MLS has a vested interest in developing the top level players in this country so they can be pros, so that the level can grow. And from that, the national teams will benefit. So I think with this move now with MLS coming in is probably going to help to try to create that kind of a pathway for those players who are really serious about the sport, who have the technical, tactical abilities and the desire to pursue the game, to have a pathway in which they can reach the highest level.
I hear you loud and clear. So we're discussing development v winning, and the fact that somehow we seem to put winning way too many times before development, and how unhealthy that is. And that combined with number of games, the training opportunities are crucial pieces in elite player pathway. I agree. Perhaps you could go on and talk a little bit or share your opinion on elite players in high school soccer and elite players and the position of a parent and the parents who are supporting the elite player path, the elite player, and how they can best achieve that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think that there's only one way for anybody to make it. I think that there could be different cases. this is a huge country. I mean, the United States is not a country. This is a continent. I mean, we could fit. You can see how many countries there are in Europe. This is how many states we have here, and clearly, each of our states has different challenges and different problems. You know, we have 50 state associations, 50 states and 55 state associations. I think at last count, right? There was states have 2 of them. So that shows you what the issues are here. The problem is this: that if a player is not put in an environment where he is challenged on a daily basis, he is not going to continue to improve. And unfortunately, in most clubs, because when you have a good player, you build your team around that player, and the one that's getting probably the least coaching is that player, is the one that needs it the most, the one that could really go the furthest. Plus, then the fact that there are not enough players to challenge him on a daily basis is making it very difficult. So, is there a right pathway, wrong pathway? I think each parent has to figure out what is best for their son. If you have a great hockey player or a great gymnast, and you're living in New York where there's not a good gymnastics school, you will end up moving your kid, if he's a hockey player, to Minnesota or to Canada to provide him the best environment. I think it's going to have to get to the point that in soccer, you're going to have to find the best environment for your son as well. More and more of the academies are popping up now. It's the pay model will continue in some degree. But I think those who are at the elite level, and MLS right now is picking up the tab for those academies. I think some of the clubs in the USL are going to begin doing likewise. So the professional game is going to start investing in player development. And that if they're going to invest, I think we're going to, if the owners are going to want to see a return on their investment. For them to invest, it has to be investing on the top athletes. So each player must figure out their way. So if college is their main goal, then maybe, this is not the right pathway for them. Maybe being in a club that is exposing them to many college coaches, many scouts, and provide some great opportunities is the way to go. But if they're serious about pursuing the game at a professional level, then they have to be reaching out for those environments. And at some point, when you're very good or you're outstanding in the level you're in, you got to go to a higher level that can challenge you.
I hear the part about challenge. Perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about, in terms of the trajectory of a youth player and their reaching potential, how important you think the role of the coach is. And then we can add on to that coaching standards and how you feel about those throughout the leagues within America.
Well, coaching is extremely important, but there are different stages. Okay, the coach at 9, 10 years of age can certainly not have the same skill sets or the same abilities as a coach that's working with a U18 or U19. So when you start, you have to have a coach that makes you fall in love with the game, that makes you look forward to going back to practice the next day. And at that point, perhaps the winning is not the most important part. If the focus is to win a state cup at U9 and U10, perhaps you're losing the sight of what the individual player wants. So in player development, it's unfortunately, it's not like tennis. We cannot develop one player that's really talented and train him individually. He has to be developed within a team infrastructure. Understanding that at a young age, not every player is going to make it. Not even when you get to be 13 or 14. Sometimes it's hard to identify those that will make it in the long run. But those who are most committed, those who are most talented, need to be in that type of an environment. The coach needs to be able to identify the individual needs of the player, help him to improve on those strengths that he has, and improve even further on the weakness, hide those weaknesses. Great player knows how to hide the weaknesses and play to the strengths. So this is what I think is part of the development of a player, and understanding also that it's not only being a star every game is going to get you there. There's got to be a balance. Sometimes I think an issue that we've had with some American players is they've been starting players since they were 8, 9 years old, all the way through to college. Now they get drafted into MLS, and they're just a role player. They're not going to be anything more ever than a role player. And it's some of them have difficulties adapting to that because they've always been the starting player. And now, how are you able to manage that? So it's psychologically, it's also how do you manage that as well? So there are many facets, and I think in every age group, you will need somebody to be able to understand what needs to be worked on and be able to push that along. A big issue here is that sometimes kids move so much from one club to another they're bouncing around, so that sometimes there is no progression in their trajectory. You go from one club to another, and maybe they didn't know what you were working on, what was the weakness. So I think that the importance of being in a professional club is you go from one set of qualified hands to another set of qualified hands. Everybody's discussing the well-being of the player and the needs, so that this player can eventually make it to the first team.
I want to bring it back to the psychology piece that you spoke about. We had Dan Abrams as a guest on a webinar last week. Do all the MLS teams have access to a psychologist, is my first question. And will that psychologist be involved in the developmental academy teams? Because I agree with you, things like resilience and emotional intelligence in dealing with disappointment is sadly lacking for most of our elite level players.
Yeah, again, in the MLS clubs, there's not one standard. I think there are different clubs at different stages, but more and more, they are all filling their roster or their coaching staff with these sports psychologists that work either on a part-time basis. Sometimes they share time between the senior team or the first team and the youth teams. But as more clubs are beginning to have academies and residencies, this becomes more important, because now you're dealing with a lot of other different facets. Is the player being away from home? Is the player dealing to these self-problems on their own, not only schoolwork, issues with their peers? So there's a lot of things that psychologists can help you with. Not only creating the right mentality, the right attitude for training. How do you come back after you've had a bad day of training? How do you come back after you had a bad game? So all of these things are really being looked at and being molded. So the short answer to you is yes, that more and more the MLS clubs are spending a lot of time. This is becoming something that is becoming a worldwide norm, and the MLS clubs are doing likewise.
Do you know if there's a plan to share that skill with the developmental academies that the MLS are taking on?
So I think part of what you will see in the near future coming out will be a lot of opportunities for coaching, for not only for player development, for also for improving the quality of what the clubs are offering. So there will, whether it be online courses or whether it be seminars and webinars or information that will be available, I think we can find all of this.
Great. So let's wrap up the coaching piece. Do you know if there's a plan to have a set standard of coaching education within the MLS DA clubs?
I think that the new league, or whatever initials are being given, is going to be a continuation of where the DA left off. Begin with that, and then slowly evolve. I mean, this is a long-time commitment that MLS is making to player development. So I think it'll continue to evolve over the years. There will certainly be coaching education being offered. One of the things that MLS has done with the academies since we started was begin to work with the French Federation, and work with the French Federation to try to get their license on formation strictly on guys who are just developers of talent. France has had a lot of success over the last 15, 20 years in the development of players. So we've sent already, we're in the fourth cycle of coaches from MLS going through this program. It has been very successful, and we've seen a difference in the attitude and the approach that these players have that are going through this course. So whether it be something similar along those lines or something that we will adapt to pass along to the American coaches, I'm sure we will work closely hand in hand with the U.S. soccer to continue the coaching education.
Brilliant. Do you know if there's plans, let's talk about parent initiatives or parent education, which I know is not a great phrase, but do you know if there's plans for a program for the DA kids with the parent piece?
Again, I think this will all be part of it, because I know that currently in the MLS academies, there are seminars and education courses for the parents, where the parents are brought in when a kid is brought into an academy, to understand, to manage their expectations, to understand what they're going to be going through and how to handle it. I will think all that information is going to be passed along.
Great. Perhaps you can give an overall view of, you think, the challenges that face MLS as they take on the academy in terms of its footprint, its size, and how long it might take for this to really have an impact where we're producing hopefully lots of high-level elite players?
Well, the biggest challenge is that we have right now is there's 26 clubs. 3 of those are Canadian. 2 more will be coming in the next couple of years. We will be getting to 30 MLS clubs here within the next few years. So by 30 clubs in a country this size, the biggest problem is going to be that. How do we impact all of the different states? So I think it's one of the big steps that was taken is this joint venture with USYSA, which is the biggest league in terms of youth in the world. And I think being able to join up with them is going to provide new opportunities. I think the idea here is to make it more inclusive, to make everybody feel part of that pyramid that is working towards developing elite level players with the goal of the World Cup of 26. So, we have a way of accelerating things here. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a major change in the way things are being done.
Great. It'd be interesting to see. We talked about challenge and players needing challenge, and I know this probably is a hot topic. You can tell me if you don't want to discuss it. But in terms of that challenge, certainly as MLS extend to 30 clubs, there's always the issue of promotion, relegation, and how that fits within this culture. If you just share your thoughts on how that all belongs.
Yeah, look, I come from a country where promotion and relegation has been the way of life there, and sort of you in Europe. I think the sports in this country are a different beast, and I think once you are involved and engaged in the sports culture of this country, you begin to understand. One thing that there is different about this league that is not in no other league in the world. If you're in Spain and you are a fan of Malaga, Sevilla, Espanyol, you're never going to win the league. You're always going to be struggling to maintain your first division drop down. The one thing about MLS is that every team at the beginning of the year realistically has a chance to win the championship. And I think that makes the fans be engaged, be a part of it. Now, once the season starts, everybody's going to be put in their place. But here in 25 years, I think we've had 13 or 14 different champions. I think that bodes very well, and it gives this competition a different type of an incentive. So I don't see it right now. I see a promotion, but not necessarily relegation. So we've seen top clubs that have come from the USL, Toronto's, Vancouver's, Portland's, Atlanta. They did very well in the USL, and now they've moved up and they're positive franchises in the first division. Can this continue to expand? Why not? I mean, I think that there is enough room here that you can probably create conferences and divisions, and who knows, maybe even a Champions League that would involve other countries in North and Central America. So I think the future is still wide open. This is still a very young league as compared to most of the top ones in the world, but they have a major stride that have been made in a short period of time. And I believe that this is on course to become truly one of the great leagues worldwide in the next few years.
Great, thank you. I think we both agree that one of the issues with the elite players is the fact that we've got 6 national championships, I believe it is. You've got ECNL, US Club, US Youth, etc., etc. When you've got 6 national champions, you've got 6 sets of kids thinking that they're the best. Is there a plan to try and bring in the top players from those leagues, or to somehow include those leagues?
Yes, so that's part of what's going to be happening. Up to now, it was only the DA was only working within the DA clubs. I think the plan that MLS has now for USYSA is begin to include once again the ODP as part of the scouting and the player identification. So teams would be invited to participate at the time when GA Cup is going on at the regional level. So there we have 3 or 4 different sites that we do this twice a year. So I think the ODP teams will begin to be included in that. If players are not involved in USYSA, they can still come to make regional, state or regional teams. I think the regional teams then will be invited to the GA Cup finals. There will be more opportunities for these players to be scouted, not only by the coaches in the MLS coaches in their region, but also at the national level. So it will be certainly the goal here is to make this more inclusive, to provide more opportunities for players who might be in markets that don't have an MLS team. And there might be some good players, and they require being seen. And if they're seen, maybe they have an opportunity to form part of these academies.
Just share with everybody, because I'm interested, your thoughts on scouting. I've been in some circles where people think we don't have enough quality scouts, that what a scout is looking for is not a well-defined product from some of the DAs. Just your general thoughts on scouting, how people can become a scout, and whether we've enough quality scouts for the number of kids.
Yeah, I think that's the next big challenge here is how do we identify those that have potential? How do we don't just become overwhelmed by bright lights when somebody has a couple of quick moves on the field, looks spectacular, but finding out what does it take to become a player at the highest level, having that resilience that is necessary, the mental toughness, the ability to learn day after day. So I do believe that the Federation began with some scouting courses already. So this is probably the first step. And this will be something that will also be a major part, because being able to identify talent is the next goal for us. I mean, no matter how you train and how much you train, if a player doesn't have the capability to meet all of the standards necessary from both the technical, the tactical, the physical, and the psychological aspect of the game, he is going to be very difficult for them to make it. So I think that's an important part, to be able to understand what a player needs to be at the highest level, and also to be able to identify that at a younger age, so that those are the players that are being given the chance to develop.
I have to extend this because I'm haunted by my Crystal Dunn story. Is when she was 14, we were at a regional tournament, and Crystal was being watched, and people kept saying, she's too small, she's too small. I coached her on a regular basis, and her heart was much bigger than her body, so it was never an issue. But I still think we're a little bit haunted, perhaps by the physical stature within certain circles. Your thoughts on that comment, or you agree, disagree?
Wholeheartedly agree. I think that we are seeing that the game right now, while there is a physicalness to it, those players who have the mental speed, the mental awareness, and the decision making, the little guys can make it. I mean, the best player in the world, or conceivably arguably one of the best players in the world, is not very big in Messi. Neither was Xavi or Iniesta, and there's a number of players that are not huge in size. Landon was not a huge kid, but he was quite a good player. So developing the soccer IQ, first and foremost, developing the abilities to survive on the field are important, and that mental speed goes way above the physical speed.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I've sort of been on the inside of was the original DA and the Federation quite keen on suggesting a formation of the playing style. So we talked about a possession-based game with people building out to the back, intelligent players, a high-pressing game. That over the years faded away. Sneeko came in, and it became no distinct style of play. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on styles of play that produced high levels of elite players. I know you talked already about dump and run, if you want to call it that, does not produce high level players. But do you think this is an important piece that people need to think about, or not so important?
Well, again, I go back to what is the soccer intelligence of that player? How well does he read the game? How well does he understand the game? Are you going to make a 9 or 10-year-old kid a right back, and he's going to be a right back for life? You're going to make him a center forward for life? No. I mean, you're finding that in countries like Brazil, or most of the guys begin as center forwards and then begin to drop back, and they move back on the field. But they have a good in-depth understanding of the game, of how to take a first touch away from pressure, how to make good one-touch decisions, how to hold onto a ball, how to take a player on. So, you have to a player has to be exposed to as many things as possible. So when he does get into a situation on the field, he's able to resolve it. If he cannot resolve it because he's lacking something, that deficiency will show sooner or later. And I believe that has been the case in a lot of the American players when they've gotten to the highest level under high level pressure. they show their deficiency. So being able to, is there one system that works better than the other? No. I think being exposed to different things, that players understand how to use the width, the length, the depth of the field, how to play in close proximity, how to open up the game with changes of direction or changes of the field. I think that's all valuable parts of the game. There's not one way to play the game of soccer, but players have to be confident enough to make the right decisions at the right time, and for that they need the right tools. And if it's not brought on from an early age, it becomes very difficult later on in life.
Yeah, let's connect that to I'll share my vision of an elite team for you. It's basically a Johan Cruyff, players interchangeable at any point in time, players who can appear in midfield or appear up front, and everybody's ultimately interchangeable. Could you share a little bit about your vision? I'm not going to tie it to MLS, just your vision of what an elite, super elite team looks like.
Super elite team, you have guys like Van Dijk and the league or Ramos in the back that are capable to come out with the ball playing, have great timing, sense of timing, winning the air game, strong on the challenge, can mark a player, can mark in between two players so that when they get exposed with numbers down, I still can make the right decision. Midfielders who can hold the ball, pressure, who can connect at speed or interplay in short spaces, and or open up the opponent's defense when they're pressing up high. And you need some speed up top and some guys who can finish. I mean, the most specific guy in the field is the 9, is the center forward that needs to be a guy who can hit a target. And that is the hardest part in football. You know, the guys who can put the ball between the 3 posts. I don't think we spend enough time with that. I think that there's a huge deficiency on our finishing. And that is clearly visible, again, at the higher up level we go, how difficult it is for guys to make the simple touch into the back of the net. So if there's one thing we need to work, we have now an overload. Everybody says center midfield. Everybody wants to be a number 10, but nobody wants to be a number 9. Nobody wants to be that finisher. So I think a team needs that balance. I agree with you that some positions can be interchangeable, but at some point they have to be specific. I mean, you need to have some guys who are tenacious defenders who know how to defend and who come out playing with the ball, and then you need those strikers. So a balance, like anything else, you need a good balance.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite the audience to start thinking about questions while I ask one more question, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Talking about finishing, and I'm certainly of the opinion that I agree with you, it's ultra important. And yet I see finishing environment after finishing environment at all levels of a game, which is line-based, rote learning, without any pressure. If the biggest problem with finishing is the pressure of the moment in a game, and we're putting players at all levels in situations as they go to goal where there's no sort of physical pressure, psychological pressure, I don't know how we ever expect to create lots of goal scorers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, you know, if you want to do a line exercise when a player doesn't know what is expected of him, demonstrate it with once or twice with that, but then it's not realistic, because in the game, you're never going to be by yourself. You're going to have the pressure, you're going to have somebody chasing you down, a goalkeeper coming out at you, sometimes feet first, and trying to take your head off. So I think the game has to be trained in a realistic manner, and pressure certainly has to be a part of training.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if people want to post any questions in the chat box, I'll be delighted to unmute you and have you ask Alfonso your question. So please feel free to pop any questions in there that you'd like me to consider. I'm analyzing the chat, Alfonso.
Yeah, no worries.
Perhaps while people are starting to think and consider, what major challenges do you see to the MLS Academy as it grows and prospers in the future?
Again, the distances in which to play. We're so scattered all over the country. So to have a one division where you would have all the top teams competing with each other would be almost like having another MLS. So it becomes cost prohibitive. The travel, taking the players away from home for long periods of time. So I think that the better we can create a subsystem where the players can have competitive matches in a regionalized basis, and the matches are meaningful week in and week out, that will certainly help. Other than that, I mean, the challenges will also be the influx of foreign clubs that are beginning to look at our players. And we certainly want the players to become, to feel that MLS is their league of choice. Now they have a league here that they grow up with. Every player under the age of 20, 25, this is the only league that they know in the United States. So they have an opportunity now to compete in a league that continues to grow. So this should be their first destination without a doubt. So those are some of the challenges, being able to put all the best players together, to attract them, to create an infrastructure where they can continue their education and at the same time be in competitive environments, the level of competition, and then trying to get those players to be good enough to start in MLS at a younger age. Not 23, 24 is a little too late. So we need to start developing players that at 18, 19 can start begin to knock on the door and could begin to push for jobs against the veteran players in the team.
Thank you. So I had two questions come in. The first one is from Ruri McGinnis, who's the DOC of East Meadow on my instructional staff. What's your thoughts on elite female players integrating and training with males as a means for progression and challenge?
I think if they can handle it, they're players. I don't think we should become so gender specific. At one point that I had coached a U14 girls team in Hoda, and those girls could play, and putting them with the U14 boys was no big deal. They could handle it. So I think it's more the ability and what a player can handle than their sex, you know. So look, if you have a real good young player, female athlete who can compete with the boys, why not compete there? You know, if strong enough, don't put her in a situation where she can be injured. But if she can handle the physicalness part of the game, I don't see any difference.
Another question that came in from Steve Freeman from Blackwatch. Do MLS clubs still have restrictions on geography with affiliations and grassroots, or is it now wide open?
There is still some restrictions. They still have certain areas within their markets, but it's evolving, and it's evolving rapidly. More and more are getting affiliate clubs outside of their market, and I mean, I cannot tell you what the future will bring, but I have a feeling that sooner rather than later, this is going to open up and it's going to become more and more of a free market. I mean, I think probably teams will have rights of first refusal in their own areas, but if a club does not want a kid that lives in New York and the team from Philadelphia or from DC wants them and is willing to take care of them, why not?
Great, thank you. John Ciano was asked if he could ask a question. So John, please unmute and ask away.
Thanks, Tim and Alfonso. Great stuff. I just had a quick question with the new formation of this MLS-based Academy League. Will MLS teams have a little bit more freedom to develop players based upon their own reality and needs, or will they still have mandated standards by U.S. Soccer?
I think the MLS clubs have been working under their own standards for quite a few years already. I think once we went in route of developing the coaching education with the French Federation and developing our coaches, the clubs have been pretty much free to pursue their own ways of developing and their own ways of training the players. This is the one area while MLS has, as a league, has certain restrictions as far as the investment on players and the investment on paying the players. There's a salary cap. There is no salary cap on player development. So here, every club is allowed to spend as much or as little as they want, and this gives them a lot of freedom into how they approach player development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question, Alfonso, was from Coach Pappy, who says, how do you define an elite player? What are the characteristics that a player must demonstrate to be considered elite?
So I think it's a player that on the field makes the right decisions. On the field constantly, he is one of probably your most active, most intense, most the earliest one to your training. He wants the game. He's there all the time, doesn't miss anything. He is really focused on it, and he makes a difference. So when he gets on the field, not only does he play well, he makes those around him play well as well, him or her. And it's clearly the player to watch in your club or player to watch in other clubs. I mean, you know those players, once they get on the field, you catches your eye because he seems to always be in the right place. He always seems to be making the right decision. And he does this consistently, not just once in a while, but game in and game out. You know what you can expect from that player. So I think for an elite player, one of the key things is consistency.
The thing I'd pull out from that is the decision making. You talked initially about the importance of making great decisions. What's your opinion on, I don't know how many youth environments you see now, whether it's the amount of coaches we still see joysticking kids, very coach directed, where coaches are making decisions and kids aren't allowed to make decisions?
Yeah, that's a challenge. That's a problem, because if a player is constantly being told what to do, how is he going to develop that intelligence to make those decisions on his own? When you get into a professional environment, you're not going to be able to hear the comments that are coming out from the sideline. So you have to be able to be confident and sound enough to make the right decisions on the field without having somebody to tell you constantly. So I think that is an issue that we have, is perhaps a little bit of overcoaching. And perhaps, we feel that we have so much information that we want to give, but the game is always easier from the outside. But the key is, how do the players make it easy once they are inside? And they can only do that if they're playing with a certain level of comfortableness, with self-assurance, and not afraid to make mistakes. If it's constant responding to a stimulus from the outside, then that player is never going to play with full confidence.
Thank you. Last question, and it came in from Coach Duran, which is, talk about, if you can, the elite pathway for girls, where you see that going, how you see that evolving.
Yeah. At this point, I think the new league is going to start focusing on the boys' side of the game, but I think there are plans for it to involve girls as well. So I think that the pathway is not going to be very different. We're seeing the women's league is growing year after year. There is going to be a pathway for professionalism. The female leagues throughout the world are growing. What's happening in France, in Spain, in Germany, in Sweden, in Japan, there are thriving professional leagues. Our country is thriving as well. So there's going to be more opportunities for these athletes who really want to pursue the game at a professional level. And the pathway is no different. It's being in the right environment day to day, being guided properly, being in a good competitive environment as far as the league that you play in and you compete in, so that you're challenged every week, and then having the goals to reach the professional game. Understanding that everybody grows at different levels. Not everybody's going to be a professional, even though you might dream about it and want to do it. It's less than 1% or 0.5% that really are going to make it in the long run. But if you follow that pathway, at the very least, you're going to be a very good college player. So that will always be something that will always be there for you. But the goal must be to play at the highest level. To play at the highest level is be a professional, and then hopefully be good enough to be in consideration for the national team.
It's funny, culturally, it's funny that you talk about late developers and kids going through periods of great development and then slowing down. One of the problems we have, I believe, with the parent piece is that a kid who develops late is quickly thrown into another sport because the parent wants the bumper sticker.
That's too bad, because again, there are a lot of players who are 13 or 14, have looked mediocre, and big clubs have given up on them, and then they end up going to a smaller club, and then the big club that originally had him ends up going to pay heavy millions to bring this player back that they had on. So it's a little bit of having patience. As long as a player is constantly progressing, there's a little progression, you got to give it a chance. Some people mature differently, and not everybody's going to be ready at 18 or 17. Some of them will be ready at 20 or 21 or 22. But the better ones they can have an accelerated pathway, but that doesn't mean that's the only way, and the only way you're going to get to the top.
Alfonso, I really have to thank you for your honesty. I've known you for a long time. You've always been straightforward, honest. Thank you for all that you do for the game. I know I appreciate you spending some time with us in what is a crazy time. I'm sure that the audience would join me in thanking you. Thanks so much, Alfonso.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm always at your disposal. Best of luck to everybody.
Thanks. Take care. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Take
good
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Alfonso. Cheers, Tim.
Cheers, Bob.
Best guys.
Thanks, Alfonso.